this one as well. So the way it'll work, I will start off just with doing a quick introduction. I'll introduce you, say who you are, what you've done, and then you can do the presentation, and then we'll take questions on the YouTube live stream that's going on. And so people won't be joining the Zoom call to avoid Zoom bombers. They'll join the live stream there. They'll ask questions there, and we'll see them here.
Great. Anything else?
Now it's going to be, we'll get started in around 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Mr. Seibel, do you have a presentation that you will be screen sharing?
Nope.
Okay. Just checking. Param, I think we're good to get started.
All right, awesome. So it looks like you do have some fans in the chat, by the way. People are saying that their brother wants to switch all the time. So first, who is Michael Seibel? If you ever use Twitch, you probably know that this. So Michael Seibel was one of the founders of Twitch, and Twitch then sold to Amazon for around $1 billion and is still live today. And then he also founded and sold a social cam app called Social Cam, and the app allowed users to easily capture and share videos, and that was also sold And now he is the CEO of Y Combinator, one of the best startup accelerators around. And to add even more to his impressive resume, he's also a board member for Reddit. So during the talk, feel free to ask questions on the YouTube live chat, and then we'll ask them here. So without further ado, feel free to take it away.
All right. Thanks for having me. So I just hit my 15-year mark of working on startups, and I thought the best thing I could do was give you all my top 5 lessons that I've learned. So step 1, I've learned that the startup world isn't actually for most people. I think that nowadays a lot of people glorify startups, and it's interesting because when I started in the 2000s, startups were seen as lame, and most more people were going into banking and finance. Now it seems like the bankers are coming over to the startup world, and I think that what I've realized is that this is a fundamentally different challenge than almost every other career. 99.99% of startup founders fail. And most people do not commit themselves to a career that has that high of a failure rate. And so I want to start by telling people that this world is not for everyone. And if you are interested in startups because your friends are, or because you think they're cool, but deep down inside, you kind of realize this isn't your world, you have permission to do something else. There's so many other cool things going on in the world, and you don't have to do startups. The second lesson I've learned, in most careers and in most young people's lives, their peers actually represent a good guide. Unfortunately, in the startup world, your peers are a horrible guide. Once again, this comes back down to the failure rate. In a world where 99.99% of people fail, most likely the people around you are in the process of failing. So I'd like to talk about this a little bit more. A success case for many young people is that they put themselves in a group of smart people in middle school and got good grades, and that got them tracked to good classes in high school. They took the AP classes, got good grades, and that got them tracked to a good college. They put themselves in the right major with the right people in college, and that's how they got the fancy internship at Facebook or Google. All of those things required looking at the people around you, putting yourself in the kind of smart, talented group, and then being average. Unfortunately, in our world, being average in the smart, talented group means your company dies. To give you a sense, right after we congratulate YC companies for getting into the batch, a batch that typically has about 2% acceptance rate, we then go on to tell them that out of a batch of 200 companies, we only expect 5 to succeed. And so you put yourself in a group of extremely talented people, and the vast majority will fail. So if you act like the average startup at YC, you fail. If you ask your kind of average peers for feedback, for guidance, for advice, the people you're asking are the people who are in the process of failing. If you're not brave enough to explore areas, think slightly differently than the people around you, you probably won't navigate the path to success. Because what I'll tell you is that every successful startup walks a pretty hard to repeat path. The third lesson is that I always try to find a professional analogy for the world of startups. So when people are trying to figure out whether this world's for them, I want to give them some analogy they can work with. My analogy that seems to work best is actually sports. So if you think about it, how many kids who play high school basketball want to make the NBA? Right? Lots, all around the world now, not even just the United States. How many do? I believe there's under 500 spots total in the NBA. How many people make an all-star team? What is that, 30? How many make the Hall of Fame? And so if you think about startup success in the context of, unless you are at the all-star / Hall of Fame level, you've probably failed. And even if you make the NBA, staying there is very, very hard. And so what I want you to kind of take away from this is that there are all kinds of things that you see in the sports world. You see a lack of work-life balance. You see people going above and beyond the coaching that they're given. You know, are you at the gym later? Are you at practice after practice is over? All of these kind of extra opportunities to do more than what the person's doing next to you. In my mind, startups are exactly the same thing. There are all of these opportunities to do more than the person next to you. And if you don't, you won't be extraordinary. If you do, you might just make it. So if the prospect of those kinds of odds is intimidating or not motivating to you, this probably isn't your world. If we go a little bit deeper, like, imagine if you wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor and you got into a prestigious law school or medical school and they said 99% of you won't become lawyers or doctors. You'd ask for your money back. Most people would ask for their money back. That's what this game is. So in my mind, what's weird is that the type of person who's good at this game, I think a lot of people look at them as heroes, but I actually kind of feel bad for them. I think that the group of us who are founders, there's something a little wrong with us that makes us excited for this type of competition, this kind of unfair competition, where the thing that kills you can come from behind your back. You've never seen it before. You don't even know you're dead until you're already dead. I would say that there's a type of person who either is extremely frustrated having a boss. There's a type of person who is so passionate about a problem, they'll work on that problem, even if the solution fails, because they want to work on the problem. There's a type of person who can't get the most out of themselves unless they're constantly facing death. Right? Like, I don't think these types are necessarily normal or healthy, but they tend to do better in the startup world. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is kind of, once again, give you some tools to think about, are you this type or not? All right, next, number 4. One of the mistakes that I see a lot of young people making in high school and college is they want to get into the startup world too quickly. And what I'll tell you is that success in our world takes 5, 10, sometimes longer years. And it usually requires you to have a great group of friends. Friends who you might hire one day, friends who you might, cry on their shoulder when things go wrong. Friends who you can just call to think through a hard problem. And one thing that I don't see young people cherishing enough is building those friendships in high school and college. I think that a lot of young people are so quick to look at the people around them and not be impressed and try to network or build relationships with people who are further along, who are older, so on and so forth. And I'll tell you, those people around you, like, those are some of your best assets. Like, those people are going to help you or not. One of the most sad things that I get to do is interact with founders who can't find co-founders. And when I dig into why, almost always the same thing comes up. I didn't make a lot of friends, or I didn't make friends who were technically talented, or I didn't make friends who were interested in this at all. You get to choose that now. You're never going to be around a group of talented, motivated people who have as little to do as you are in high school and college. And trust me, I know it might feel like in high school and college there's a lot to do, but it's nothing compared to the startup world. So don't grow up too fast. Make sure you're understanding one of the key values you get out of a college education is friendships. Friendships with people you respect. Number 5, there's a proliferation of marketing in the startup world today. I do it at YC. YC does it. VCs do it. Investors do it. Founders do it. If you are, on Twitter, you're probably seeing and being bombarded by infinite amount of information about the startup world. Unfortunately, people who haven't started companies yet, people who are less experienced in the startup world, they confuse that marketing for true insights. They confuse that marketing for true advice. And what they're not seeing is something that's happening a little bit under their level of perception, which is that so much money is flowing into the startup investing world that investors have realized that they're becoming commoditized. What's the difference between taking 500,000 from this person or this person? More and more, that difference is shrinking. The advice that you need is online. The networks that you need, you can find yourself. You can build product yourself, right? Software is cheap. More and more investors are being commoditized, especially at the early stages. And so whenever you see something being commoditized, what usually happens is brand and marketing, right? I'll give you a perfect example in the real world, soda. There's not much of a difference between sodas. So what does Coca-Cola spend a bunch of money on? Marketing, advertising. Do you believe Coca-Cola advertising when you watch it? No, not really, right? Coca-Cola is not going to make you cooler or like, I don't even know what the hell they tell you it's going to do now, but it doesn't do any of those things, right? It gives you diabetes. Like that's what it does. And they don't mention that in the ads. Similarly, if you confuse the marketing that comes from investors with real insights, you will go down a wrong path. And so there's a lot of good writing out there from people who've actually done things. I would seek to learn from people who've actually built companies, who've actually built products that you use and respect. I would seek to not learn from people who seem to be just trying to build a brand online. Now, one of the things that happens when you consume all this marketing is you start believing that there exist trends in the startup world. Let's be clear, your friends start believing these trends too. And then you get herded into doing a startup that follows one of these trends. Now, I love this because if you were to take a step back, you would realize just by thinking from first principles, most of the products you use today, when they were invented, they were not on trend. Zoom was not on trend. No one imagined COVID world. Facebook was not on trend. Everyone thought MySpace already won the game. Google was not on trend. Everyone thought search was commoditized. From the YC world, Coinbase was not on trend when it launched. When Coinbase launched, if you set up an account in 2012, you got 1 free Bitcoin. Guess what? Nobody cared. So you have to ask yourself, if you are consuming marketing, turning that into thinking that this is a startup trend, and turning that into thinking your idea needs to be on trend, you're almost being funneled into a failure path. You're almost walking into a path that guarantees failure. If investors knew what the right trend was to invest in, they would quit their jobs and start the company in that trend because they get a lot richer being a founder. They don't know. They don't know at all. So when we see companies apply to YC and it switches from building a mobile, local, social thing in 2010 to building a online to offline thing in 2015 to building a crypto thing in 2017, to building an ML AI thing in 2019, 2020, each one of those founders doesn't realize that they're just part of this mega trend. They don't have any insights, that they're not even really in control of their startup. They just ceded control over to whatever people were talking about in the tech investment world, which is unfortunate. So, point number 5 is ignore the trends and be brave enough to do something that is not on trend. When you're thinking about solving a problem in the world, you should think that if you solve the problem, you create the trend. Founders create trends. The second thing that I will say is you're aiming for a point 5 to 10 years from now. If a trend is describing what's cresting today, you really need to understand what's going to crest 5 to 10 years from now. All right, now I've got 2 more bonus ones because I still have a little bit of time. So number 6, I have a lot of friends who are wealthy and not happy. And I think the reason why was because when they were young, they never really stopped to think what brings satisfaction in their life. They believed the kind of general American dream marketing, which is like more money equals satisfaction. Now, most of my friends who started startups around the same time I did are wealthy, and most are not happy. So what's going on? The way that I think about this is that if money is your primary life KPI, you're always going to be unhappy. Because in the ranking of people who have money, there will always be people who have way more money than you. So I'd like to give you a more complicated way of thinking about what your life KPI should be. Imagine your life KPI should be satisfaction. It turns out that if you can convert money to satisfaction more efficiently, you need less money. And I'll tell you that most rich people convert money to satisfaction very inefficiently. Very, very, very inefficiently, right? I'll give you an example. A rich person is going to fly private to their vacation. That private flight, one way, might cost $100,000. $100,000 to optimize a 6-hour trip. Is that an efficient conversion of money to satisfaction? Could you convert $100,000 to more satisfaction? Probably, which means you need less money. And so I think that if you think about maximizing satisfaction, you start seeing all these situations where the people around you are wasting money and not getting happiness from it. And you can start learning throughout your 20s and early 30s what things translate to satisfaction in your life. Whether it's friends, family, relationships, travel, life experiences, usually it's not just cash. And so item number 6, don't grow up to be rich and sad. That's a very bad combination. It leads to drug abuse and it just leads to a lot of bad things. Don't walk that path. The last one, the last bonus, and then I'm happy to go to questions. There's this myth out there that there are a group of responsible adults making sure that everyone's okay, making sure the big problems are getting solved, making sure that things are going to be okay. And those people take responsibility for the world so that you can do whatever you want to do, whether it's write a book, become an academic, do a startup, work at Google. The responsibility is theoretically off of you because there are these magical adults who are responsible. Turns out that's not true. Turns out that there are no magical adults who are responsible for anything. It turns out the world is all of our responsibility. If there's something you don't like about the world, one of the things I've realized is that if you don't try to change it, there's no guarantee anyone else will. And 10 years later, the world might be exactly the same way. The problem might exist in the exact same way. So instead of looking for problems that are weird trends or cool or using some new technology, like all your friends are, all your friends who are being funneled into failure every day, think about what problems that exist in the world that you could take responsibility for. Think about how you can fundamentally change something in the world and make it a better place. Because more often than not, the only way that's going to happen is if you decide to do it. So the last one is the world is all of our responsibility. And we all either take that responsibility or ignore it. All right. With that, I saved some extra time for questions. Let's do a bunch of questions. I'm happy to answer anything about literally anything.
Awesome. All right, so I'll get the ball rolling in one from the stream. So someone said, I have a question in regards to finding problems and cultivating new experiences. COVID has made it exceptionally difficult, at least for students. So what's your advice to finding these problems and experiences during COVID?
So many things about finding a problem to work on, I think, are about managing what's going on in your head versus your life experiences. So I want to talk about this a little bit. I think that if you're 18 years old, you've certainly observed some problems in your life, right? Like problems have happened to you. What's tricky is that they probably went one of three ways. One, the problem's not that significant to you. You don't care. Two, the problem was significant and you found a solution. Three, the problem was significant and you didn't find a solution. Number three is a really tricky one because what most people do after trying to solve a significant problem for a long time and not being successful is they believe that it is unsolvable. The failure mode that I see a lot of founders do is they look at their life, they take problems that they could start startups with, but convince themselves that there are no solutions to those problems. So they put them off to the side. And then they go down a wild goose chase. They either pretend like they have a problem they don't, they adopt someone else's problem they don't know well, they just adopt some technology. Oh, like let's figure out what ML can do. But like I have no idea how I want to apply it or where do I want to apply it. And then they kind of get caught in this trap. Usually the trap becomes what we call at YC pivotitis, right? When you're working on something you don't know well and you don't give a shit about, it's really fucking easy to quit. And so when you're trying to think about a problem to work on, one, there's kind of like two hints I want to extract from what I just said. One is look for the problems that you have that you're intimidated by, that you believe are too hard to solve. That's a great place to start. And two, hack your motivation. Thinking about choosing a problem, you should be thinking about how do you hack your motivation. How do you choose a problem that you're going to stay motivated to work on even when there isn't progress? Because I guarantee you there won't be progress. I guarantee you there are going to be really tough times. If you choose a problem you care about, you're willing to get through those tough times. If not, you're just going to pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot and basically waste your time.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So next question also from the stream. So as someone interested in research, how do you choose between making an impact in academia versus joining a startup or creating a startup?
One piece of advice that I'll give you, the person who asked this question, I think is generally applicable, is that I think that young people overemphasize information from who they perceive to be experts, and they underemphasize original research. If you want to figure out what the startup world is like, email 3 people who work at early stage startups. If you want to figure out what the academic world is like, email 3 postdocs. Most people choose their career paths without understanding what is involved at all. without ever really even talking to people who do those paths. You know why? Because they talk to their peers instead. Their peers that don't know anything, right? Their peers who are saying, oh, I want to do research because that's what really makes the world go forward. Or I want to do startups because that's what really makes the world go forward. But like, your peers are just as dumb as you are. Break out of that group and go find some original information. I think that there's amazingly valuable work you can do in academia and amazingly valuable work you can do in startups. I think putting yourself in an environment where you get the most out of yourself is how you actually achieve success. So go talk to some people in those environments and try to understand, will I thrive in those environments or will I not? And that's how you pick. And please don't ask your friends. Like, I went to Yale. The number of my friends who were doctors and lawyers who hate their lives is almost 100%. And the reason why they did that was because they either talked to their parents or their peers. They didn't bother to ask a lawyer what they do every day. They didn't bother to ask a doctor what they do every day. Think about how stupid that is. Like, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of your life getting specialized education, and you didn't even bother to ask anyone who's doing it right now. And let's be clear, I almost made the same mistake. I was going to be a lawyer. I ended up working for a really famous and really important lawyer, um, a lawyer who argued a case in front of the Supreme Court that basically saved abortion rights. And when I asked her whether I should be a lawyer, she, in 3 minutes, described to me what the life of a lawyer was. And she asked, do you want to do that? And I said, no. And she said, then you should not be a lawyer. In 5 minutes, she talked me out of my 5-year from high school through college plan. I'm happy she took a second to chat with me because I would have hated being a lawyer. And you know what? I hired my first lawyer at 23. So lawyers are everywhere. Like, they're a dime a dozen.
Right. Yeah, definitely a great example of like some low-hanging fruit that can have huge impact. So next question is from the stream. What level of development, assumedly in a startup or product, do you see as the minimum before trying to find investors?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, I just appreciate that you asked the question that way, because I think the number one failure case that I see is come up with the idea, build pitch deck, try to raise money. That's a failure mode. That basically gives the investor all the leverage. If the investor doesn't give you money, nothing happens. When an investor has a lot of leverage, they slow down, they offer worse terms, they treat you like shit. So I would think about what's the opposite of that. In my mind, the time to raise money is when you're at what I call a local maxima of leverage over the investor. And if we think about local maxima, we'll say basically like, okay, at no point in the next 6 months will I have more leverage over this investor in getting them to say yes or no than now. What causes leverage? Well, in today's world, one, having a technical co-founder or being technical yourself is almost a requirement. Two is building a demo or building the first version of the product. Almost a requirement. Three, getting your first customers. That's when you start building some additional leverage. That's when you start looking a little different, getting some customers. Getting those customers to be paid customers. Now you start looking a little bit more different. Learnings from those customers and iterating your product a couple times. Now you're really starting to differentiate yourself. So the question you got to ask yourself is that, like, can I build software cheap enough so I can walk down that path before I have to pitch? Because if I can, my chances of actually having leverage over the investor go way up, which means I get better terms from better investors, so on and so forth. What you need to not do is believe the marketing. The marketing from investors says, come talk to me anytime. Come talk to me. Even if you don't have an idea, I want you to talk to me, right? And that's marketing because it's a competitive environment. but like that marketing doesn't reflect the real world. If you just talk to some investor when you have an idea, you're going to have way less leverage than the founder that pitched right after you, that has a first version, a shitty version of the initial product with a couple shitty customers. One thing that I always want to remind founders about is always think about the company that's going to pitch before or after you. Even though they're not in your industry, in many ways, you're competing with them for investor dollars.
Right. Definitely some great points. So another person asked in the stream, they want to have the required experience and maturity before getting into a startup. And I believe the average age, the YC startup founder is 29. So they asked, what do you think is the right age for a startup?
First, I think the idea that you need a certain amount of maturity is not an idea of your own. I think it's an idea that whoever said that stole from someone else without thinking about it very hard. Because many of the products that you use today were created by people who are younger than 29. So once again, if you're going to be successful in a world that kills everyone, you really need to kind of move past the general bullshit of business advice. Like you really gotta go deeper than that, right? Like that level, you're gonna get slaughtered. The second thing I'll say is one thing that I see a lot of young people do and a lot of first-time founders do is reduce a multivariable problem to a single variable, right? In this equation, there are two variables, you and your startup. Somebody could be ready to do a startup at 22. The next person who's sitting next to them might not ever be ready to do a startup. When are you ready? I don't know. There's a lot of variables there. Money is a factor, insight's a factor, technical ability is the factor. But what I will tell you is the idea that you need experience is provably wrong, right? Like provably wrong. Yet the number of young people who I hear say, I need to have a couple years at Google before I start my company, that literally is just copied from people's peers. It's not reflecting the real world. Mark Zuckerberg didn't have a couple years at Facebook before he started Facebook. Like, these ideas are perpetuated by peers who don't know anything. So when are you ready? Instead of looking outside to some expert who doesn't know you at all, look inside. That's how you're gonna figure it out.
Right, and that goes really well back into your other point about, don't have the blind lead the blind. Don't ask your friends if they've never done it. So next question from the stream, what are some of the most important things to do in college?
I would say that if you're going to spend time programming in college, get experience launching products to people. Get experience getting people using software that you create. I think that there's a jump between doing well in classes and actually launching product that people can use. And you have the opportunity to actually get some practice doing the second one. So take it. I'd say the second thing, and it was interesting actually, over New Year's, I was with a bunch of friends and I actually asked them what's the thing that they would go back to college and tell themselves to do. And universally, the message was be braver. They were afraid in college. They were afraid to ask someone out. They were afraid to take a class that was too hard. They were afraid to do an activity. Like, it's interesting how much when they look back at school, fear was one of the biggest motivators. Motivators not the right word. Drivers of their day-to-day activity or lack thereof. And so probably the second thing I would do is think about where you're feeling fear and explore that more. And try to defeat that. Try to move towards the fear and realize that it doesn't really exist and it's not justified. And then three, the message I said before, make close friends. Like if you leave college without making close friends, the money that you're investing in college is not being used as efficiently. And you get to choose where you recruit friends from. If you think technology is going to be extremely important over the next 50 years, you might try to make more friends who believe that. um, I might not try to prioritize the friends that I make based on who's popular or who looks good or who, I don't know, stupid shit like that. One thing that we always say at YC is nobody wants to peak in high school, right? And so what's funny is we tell people like, hey, YC is the beginning of the journey. Demo day is just the very beginning of the journey. Nobody wants to peak on demo day. Nobody wants demo day to be the best day in the history of their company, right? And so don't respond to the people who are peaking in college. Like they don't matter. Just like the people who peaked in high school don't matter.
Awesome. Makes a lot of sense and definitely probably helpful to the college students listening. So next question, how do you deal with continued denial of your idea?
Welcome to the world. I mean, no's are part of the game. This kind of goes back to, do you have the right psychology to do this well? Can you get punched in the face every day, wake up in the next morning and say, I'm going to go do this? The other thing is, I think that no's really screw people when they're operating in a space where they're not an expert, right? If you're a doctor who's done knee replacement for professional athletes at the highest level for 25 years, you're an expert. If someone tells you something that's wrong, you don't care what their opinion is. Like you literally do not care. And if the common way that most people treat knee injuries is incorrect, you're confident in saying that because you're an expert. Every person is an expert in something in their life. There's something in their life that you've experienced enough that if someone is kind of pushing a bullshit line to you, you know that it's bullshit. And so I think that the no's are really discouraging when you operate in a space where you have no expertise, because your thin mental model of you being kind of a genius in this new area can get destroyed very easily. This is actually another interesting thing that I see in founder psychology. I see founders basically consistently having grass is greener feelings around spaces they don't know well and problems they don't know well. When it's a problem you know well, you know all the problems, you know all the issues, you know why solutions in the past haven't worked. You can be discouraged. When it's a problem you don't know well, it's extremely easy to lie to yourself. It's extremely easy to tell yourself, everyone who's tried to solve this before is an idiot. As you can see from my simple Excel spreadsheet and landing page, this is clearly the right way to do it, and they're all stupid. It's like, well, probably you're stupid. Especially if you're not an expert, and by expert, I don't mean you've been doing this for 10 years. By expert, I mean you've done any research at all. The number of founders that I see starting products trying to solve problems where they haven't even talked to 100 people who have the problem, where they haven't even researched 5 products that have tried to solve the problem and failed, where they never even emailed a founder who's tried to solve the problem and failed. These are all things that can be done in days, not years. And if you're not even willing to do that, maybe you're more in love with the idea of startups than the idea of actually solving problems for people and building successful companies. We have a name for those people at YC. They're called scenesters. They're more interested in the scene, the startup scene, to be seen as cool, to raise money, to have employees, to have a cool office, than actually solving problems. The startup world's full of scenesters. The thing is that like scenesters die. They just fail all the time. So don't be that.
Right. Yeah, it definitely goes back to a great point about how I was saying not everyone is meant to do a startup. I believe Shashank has a question that was DM'd to him.
Yeah, before we go back to the YouTube questions, I got a question from Ronald from the Slack. He asks, can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with Twitch? Did you always know that it would become a massive video game streaming service?
No. Okay, so here's the other thing that I want everyone to understand. Um, there's always at least two stories behind every successful company. There's the story for the press, and there's the real story. Um, if you are consuming media in any way, you're getting the fake story. Unless you're talking to the people who are there, or you're actually consuming media that they've directly created and they have incentive to tell you the truth, you're probably not getting the truth. So if we walk through the path of Twitch from idea 2006 to sale 2014, I'll give you a quick breakdown of what's going on. Step one, Justin Kahn and Emmett Shear want to start a startup after their last startup in the first YC batch, Kiko, basically failed. They sold it for about $250,000, but they were building a calendar, an online calendar product, and Google Calendar came out and just destroyed them. The very beginning is they pitched, I think, 3 or 4 ideas to Paul Graham, and he hated all of them. And so what became Twitch was their like 5th idea. That idea at the time was Justin was going to broadcast his life 24/7, and we called it live streaming. Why that can become a $1 billion startup, I have no idea. I still don't know. It's still probably the worst idea I've ever heard in my entire life. That's the starting point. The next kind of major product moment was in April 2007 when we launched that show. And for 3 months, we were celebrities. Celebrities, I mean, that's a weird concept. We were minor tech celebrities. And we thought we might have been onto something. But 3 months after launch, we realized that while we are smart people, we're not good entertainers, and nobody wanted to watch our reality TV show. First pivot, we're going to build a platform that allows anyone to broadcast live video. We launched that in October 2007. We assumed that a lot of other people would live stream their lives and they'd just be more interesting. But by 2008, we realized the primary use for live video is premium content. Premium content. And the most popular live video in the world is sports. So what started as one guy in Morocco pointing his webcam at his television stream so that his friends in America could watch a local Moroccan professional league game turned into all kinds of copywritten content on our site. We lived in that world for a couple years, where there was a ton of copywritten stuff. A lot of the rights owners were trying to come after us. We were sued, like all kinds of issues. But in that world, we became profitable. And then we hit the next moment where we realized no matter what we do, we can stay alive probably with a site that has a bunch of copywritten content, but we can't really grow and thrive. The next thought came, okay, what can we do? And there were 2 thoughts. One was we saw the rise of Instagram, but there was no comparable video product. And we were very experienced at video at this time. So we thought, let's make Instagram for video. That was one idea. Second idea was about 20% of our traffic for years had been video gaming content. And we just ignored those streamers because it was only 20% of the traffic, and we had better things to worry about. Maybe a site that featured that content alone would do something. And like our kind of slight insight there was we had all grown up playing video games and watching our friends playing video games, right? Like we'd all grown up in that environment where like you'd be in a room with 6 of your friends, but only 2 people would be on the controllers at any given time. And so that sparked Twitch. And that moment really happened 4 years after we started the company. So, when you read the story of Twitch today, it doesn't sound anything like that. But the thing that actually got us through all of that bullshit, there are only 2 things. One, Justin, Emmett, and Kyle, all 3 of them were software engineers. And all 3 of them were software engineers who were never intimidated by building software. And so we always had a software advantage over every one of our competitors. That was the first thing. The second, and I don't know why, we just refused to fucking give up. Like we just, there's a lot of talk about mental health in the startup world now, and I think it's good. But like what we did was we basically just said, our startup's the only thing we've ever done in our lives. If this startup fails, we get an F for life. We refuse to fail. And even when we didn't know what to do or how to do it or yada yada, it just came back to like, do you want an F for life? No? Okay, well, you'll figure out how to get out of this hole. And so, yeah, that's what happened.
Right. No, definitely a great story, and one that probably most people don't know how it started like that. So another question from the stream: if I have several different ideas, how do I choose which one to focus on?
So I hate the word idea. I think that I want to go back to problems, because in my mind, any problem that you want to solve, you're going to have many different ideas for what the solution should be. And many of your initial ideas of what the solution should look like are going to be wrong. But you're only going to learn that after building them, giving them to customers, and see what happens. So if I had a bunch of ideas that I liked, I would basically go one step back and say, how do I list the problems that these ideas solve? And then I would go back to hacking my motivation. Which of these problems I'm going to be motivated to work on when I'm getting punched in the face every day? When I got the 50th investor no, which of these am I going to be still excited to work on? And that's probably where I would start. You should never assume quick success in startups. Quick success never happens. It is so infrequent that you should assume it never happens. So you should be optimizing for what are you going to be excited to work on when you're failing? Who are you going to be excited to work with when you're failing?
Right. No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Definitely get tough. So another person asked in the stream, if you're incredibly passionate about something really hard, for example, brain-computer interfaces, should you still work on it where the chances of it even working are slim, or should you try something easier?
So I think that the deeper question here is there are some technologies that are not yet ready for commercialization. If you think about startups tend to not really innovate, especially software startups. They don't tend to really innovate and invent something completely new. They tend to use stuff that's been invented by other people, rearrange it in a way that solves problems for people. And so you have to ask yourself, for any technology, what phase is it in? Is it an initial phase where it's still theory? Is it in the early kind of academic phase where it's being explored? Or is it far enough along that you can actually use it to solve problems? I think I probably judge whether I would do a startup in any specific, using any specific technology by trying to figure out in what phase is that technology. And if the technology is not at a commercialization phase yet, then you can't use it to solve any problem. And if you can't solve a problem, you can't build a company that people want to use or want to pay for. So once again, I really want to kind of break out of this technology world. Like, Google used interesting technology, but the problem that they were solving was that search engines sucked. They gave you the results you didn't want, and it took too long to load. Those are real problems, and the web was exploding with content. But the search engines at the time didn't give you access to it. That wasn't a technology looking for a problem. That was a problem looking for an interesting technical insight. And PageRank was that insight. And so you really should think that way when you're trying to figure out kind of this game.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. So Shashank, I believe, do you have time for one more question, or are we going to hand it over to the next event?
I think we can take one more question and then we will have to go on to the next event.
Sounds great. What's the last one?
Gotcha. So last one. So from the live stream, what would you see as a rough idea for the kinds of skill sets that members in a software startup should have? And it doesn't mean super specifics like web dev knowledge, et cetera, but marketing versus coding, et cetera.
This is the easiest question I've gotten today. Learn by doing. You learn by doing. I don't think, when it comes to marketing or sales or yada, 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 most of the first-time founders I interact with don't have much experience in these areas, but they get experience much faster than their peers because in the startup world, you just have to do shit. Like you don't wait till someone teaches you. You don't sit there, like you just do. So it turns out you learn a lot faster when you either get a sale or your company dies. You learn a lot faster when either you fix the bug on your website or a company dies. It just turns out like that's a really great environment to learn, right? And like I think it's rare that people don't understand that environment because most of the time in school, not most time, almost all the time, you're not put in a position where if you don't learn something, there are massive negative consequences. But in the startups, there's massive negative consequences. It really changes your motivation levels. And you just end up learning stuff that you never thought you could in an amount of time that didn't seem possible before.
Gotcha. All right, maybe one more really, really quick one. This person seemed like they haven't asked the question before. So it would say, oh, I don't know where it went. Oh, yes. So should one continue solving a problem or pursuing a problem and building a startup where the target audience is limited or niche? And they gave an example of like deep learning enthusiasts.
Hence, one, sometimes it's hard to know who will have that problem in the future, right? Like, I think a lot of people thought of Zoom as being somewhat niche, and then it turned out to not be so niche. And then two, it depends on how much people are willing to pay for a problem. So,
right.
As in all things, the answer is there is no general solution here.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense. All right. So I believe we got to leave a buffer for the next event, but thank you so much, Mr. Seibel, for doing this. We appreciate it a lot. Definitely some great insights. Alicia Shank's going to talk about the next event now.
Sounds great. Thanks again. Have a great day, you guys.
Thank you. You too.
You too. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this event. Right after this, at 2 p.m. Pacific time in 7 minutes, we have our talk from Xylem titled Xylem and the Importance of Solving Water. This talk is followed by an AMA with Xylem's Chief Information Officer, and this is a really good talk to attend if you are planning on submitting your project to Xylem's water problem statement. So I think someone will be sending the link to this talk in the chat here, but if not, you can always go onto our YouTube channel and find it there.
Hopefully at the next event, or best of luck on the hackathon.
Bye, everyone.